Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And right now we've got an Ashnod Flesh Mechanist deck, a low power style deck that comes to us from Dark Samus 1992. They say this is their Ashnod Flesh Mechanist low power deck. Main game plan is playing Ashnod and some sack fodder early on to get a few power stones and start ramping into a big artifact thing or a bunch of equipment. They're looking for more good sack fodder I can play on turn 2, maybe some big artifacts I've missed that can be good, or any card in general that would work well in this weird deck. Budget would be $5 per card at most. This is a fantastic deck. I really like it, and as I always say, go check out the deck list in the video description. I am demanding you check out this deck list. Now, it's not a complete deck. It has a lot of different directions it can be improved in, but I want this to be an example of that decks don't always need to be leaning towards high power. And Ashnod is not a commander we would particularly consider to be high power, but this is a really smart direction to go in, and the deck itself, in many ways, feels like it's on the right track. So, what are we taking a look at? First, let's talk about our commander first, and then we'll go look at the curve. So, Ashnod Flesh Mechanist, Mechanist, is a 1 black, 1/1 human artificer. She's got Death Touch, and she says whenever she attacks, you can sacrifice another creature. If you do, you create a tapped Power Stone token. What is a Power Stone token? Well, let's go into tokens and remind ourselves. A Power Stone token taps for a colorless, and that colorless cannot be used to cast a non-artifact spell. Now, the really important thing about this is it doesn't say must be used to cast an artifact spell. All it says is that it cannot be used to cast a non-artifact spell. So we're going to see the ways that this deck gets around that. Collapse this back out, and we'll read Ashnod's final ability that says for 5 mana, exile a creature card in your graveyard, create a tapped 3/3 colorless zombie artifact creature token. Now, this last ability is definitely the weaker of her, I guess, of the two abilities, because Death Touch isn't really an ability. And what we should be thinking of is mainly using that first ability. We are going to be trading our creatures for Power Stone tokens. So let's look at how our deck builder has used this idea to the maximum potential. So something like this Clay Revenant is kind of too much on the nose because it is an artifact creature, so I'm actually going to go down to Persistent Specimen. So Persistent Specimen is one of many creatures Black has that can reanimate itself for a mana cost. Now, the exchange usually is that these creatures are either particularly weak or do not have a particularly prohibitive reanimation cost. Here we can see it costs 2 and a black to get a 1/1 back onto the battlefield tapped. But as you remember, and this is where I think the genius of the deck really shines, is that Power Stones do not care what the actual card is as long as you're not casting a non-artifact spell with it. So activated abilities are absolutely on the table, and you can be using these Power Stones to bring them back. So with that in mind, there's already a lot of really good stuff in here. Now, the deck builder is looking for other 1 and 2 mana creatures to sacrifice, and I'm going to be honest, I'm hard pressed to offer more on that table because I think this collection is already rather high. The truth is that when we have something like Clay Revenant or Persistent Specimen out, or even Reassembling Skeleton, where are you? They all represent that with enough Power Stones, it costs 1 black to reanimate this creature, right? The Power Stone mana becomes negligible over time, and so we're just paying the non-colorless mana in order to get your creature back. So, though it might be a bit of an investment at first, very quickly, we start turn 1, we play Ashnod. Turn 2, we play Reassembling Skeleton. Then we attack with Ashnod, sacrifice the skeleton, get our first Power Stone. And then on the subsequent turn, we play a third land. We have 2 black open to do whatever we want, and 1 black and 1 power stone to reanimate the reassembling skeleton should we want to do that immediately and get another trigger from Ashnod. And from that point on, it's all just gravy, right? After we pay that additional black each time, reassembling skeleton has already paid for its cost. So I think that's rather cool. I don't think we really need to add too much more. And if there were ones to add, the ones I would go for immediately, let's type in reassembling skeleton. I would like the text. Return graveyard to the battlefield tapped. And let's take out this part because that's going to be replaced by this card. And let's see how many creatures we may have missed. Because to me, the main thing I want is activated abilities. Clay Revenant's here. Cult Conscript is playable, but once again has a restriction that you're required to have a non-skeleton die, which is very doable because not all of these creatures that die and come back are skeletons, but I will say a large amount of them are, and so I wouldn't be in such a rush to play this. Make sure you have enough skeletons otherwise. Now, Dread Wanderer requires you to have no cards in hand. That's not particularly good, but Gutter Bones, another skeleton, of course, feels particularly playable as it just requires you have hit one of your opponents, which is highly likely. Haunt of the Dread Marshes also seems particularly, or Dread Marshes, I should say, is particularly good as it has an additional ability where it scries each turn each time it comes back. It needs a legendary creature, but lo and behold, you happen to have one right here. So I think that would be a nice and easy um, replacement. Eternal Taskmaster, my goodness, is also really interesting because it kind of, like, though it doesn't mean to, it doesn't bring itself back. It works really well in a similar vein as your commander, where it's an attack trigger, and then you can use the Power Stone mana to pay for the 2 and 1 black to return any creature that comes from your graveyard to your hand. I really like that. I think that fits really, really well. And I think that's kind of where I would stop the list. The rest of them, though, are interesting. They're too much mana or too many other abilities. I like, once again, Gutter Bones, Haunt of the Dead Marshes, and Eternal Taskmaster all kind of catch my eye here. So I would probably suggest putting those in. They're also, the first 2 are also 1 mana. If you really wanted, I think Cult Conscript could fit in there. I'll leave that to you. But I think those are ones that you could easily slot in with very low opportunity cost and match the power level of the deck. The next thing I want to look at is I want to talk a little bit about what you're ramping out. So coming back here, we actually never came back to here. How do I put this? Our curve is interesting. This is a ramp deck formally, right? And the goal is to be ramping out artifacts. And so there's a large number of these cards that we can just kind of write off, but there's some we cannot. And some of these stand out just a little more than others. So for example, someone like Drana. Drana is a particularly strong card, and I feel often a remnant from the old days of Commander, where it was seen as almost an unbeatable threat. We don't live in that world anymore. Drana will still take the full 5 mana for you to cast her, and yes, you can use the Power Stones on her ability, but you still have the 2 black mana required to do so. I don't think this is like, even in the idea of low power, this is the problem with Drana is not that she is low, like too high power or too low power. It's that she's clunky. You're going through a lot of motions to not really do anything. And for a deck that is so well oiled, I think there's a pun there with the Phyrexian oil, but a deck that is so well oiled, it feels strange to have an inclusion like that. That Drana kind of sticks out. I would say the same for other ones, like Geth Lord of the Vault is a little confusing. Um, but Herald of Anguish, of course, makes perfect sense because it has improvise. So what I would do is I would have second thoughts on both Geth and Drana. I think Death Tyrant is fine because you can cheat it into play from your graveyard, and Sir Conrad also feels fine because, as you mentioned, it is a very very powerful ability and can close out games in a particularly fair way at this power level. Similarly, I feel like I don't think I can Terracier's Devastation also is on theme, but feels a little weird because you can't use the Power Stones to cast it. Like I do know that you're playing Inspiring Sanctuary, which is like half the point of the deck, but even then it feels weird to have a card that's so in tune with Power Stones, but you can't use Power Stones to cast. I don't know. I don't think it's the worst card. It just kind of sticks out to me. Likewise, Living Death feels particularly strange here. I know with the sheen of the metal, it feels like it's an artifact card from where are they? Necro somethings. I don't remember. I've never played 40k, but this is actually kind of not great in your deck. If you think about how the majority of your cards come back on your own, if you are playing well to the board, advancing it slowly, and taking advantage of your creature's abilities, your graveyard's actually going to be pretty empty in comparison to everyone else's. Yeah, and even if it is, it's going to be filled with things like reassembling skeleton, which are not the ideal living death targets. I understand its power as a board clear, but I think perhaps it's a little, I don't know, it's a little lopsided in a deck like this. Whereas I think you can just stay at the same power level. Let's go into black. Let's put 5 mana. And there's probably going to be a large amount of very playable 5 mana board clears. He says out loud, not realizing that no, that's apparently not true. Okay. I guess Crux of Fate. That's, huh, huh. I think at that point I might go to 6 and play Invasion of Fiora, which I can't imagine is a $5 card. Okay, it's not. Invasion of Fiora because it's easy actually for you to trigger them, and their name is Death is interesting. Unfortunately, does destroy your commander, so maybe not that great. But I more my point is Living Death kind of sticks out here. I think Monumental Corruption is fantastic. And I think that's the majority. Let's look at these last ones, these big mana cards. Gilded Lotus, I don't think really belongs in a deck like this, just because you already have your ramp engine. And yes, Gilded Lotus can help you cast some of your non-artifact spells. But I think 9 times out of 10, you'd rather it to be Inspiring Sanctuary. And so it's kind of just doing a poor job here. And this is the kind like Gilded Lotus fixes your colors, quote unquote, but really, most of the time, you're paying 5 mana to ramp 3. And this isn't a deck that needs to go from 5 to 8, right? This is a deck that goes from like 2 to 4, which, if you can see, works really well with the majority of the cards you're playing. Player Bridge is fine. I think you said something in their note. They said silly expensive stuff like Player Bridge is fine as long as we don't abuse them. I would say this is particularly telling that you don't have anything big to plop onto the battlefield from Planar Bridge. I get that this is intended, but this is a lot of mana. This is 14 mana to do something very fairly. A little while ago, I was on a friend's stream and we were playing Commander, and one of the players there expressed something very similarly, and they played a planar bridge, and I was under the impression that we had lost the game, and then they proceeded to play it very fairly. And I do understand that low power and the interest of playing this card because it's a fun, flashy card, which it is, without ending the game is attractive. But I'm just going to ask, then why play it, right? Maybe this is an opinion or an ideological thing, but in my argument, like you have to severely power down your deck for planar bridge to be bad, or not. I don't mean bad. I mean not amazing. And so why are you creating this situation for yourself? You might as well just not play planar bridge. And a very very similar card is Bolas' Citadel, which is within budget, barely, if you can find the. Oh yeah, the promo. Yes, that's the one. I have several copies of myself. So Bolas' Citadel is very similar to Planar Bridge in the sense that its power level is dictated by your deck strength. You can't just put Bolas' Citadel into anything, right? If you might just brick incredibly quickly or lose all your life incredibly quickly. But it offers you an alternate win condition with the sacrifice 10 permanents, which is something your deck is very, very good at doing. And I don't think it's too high power level. It fits the theme as well as being an artifact. It still costs 3 black to play, so you don't feel like you're cheating it out completely free. And honestly, it's just a really fun card. You know, you're going to play this in a low power deck, and what? You're going to pay 10 life for like 4 or 5 reassembling skeletons. Like that's fun. You feel like you've put the board into a very like a very strong state, but it wasn't free to do so, and you got to play a lot of your cards. I don't think anyone's going to be complaining that you've done this because you didn't use this and then go off with oh, I can never remember what it's called, the life gain, the one that you pay 50 life and destroy and like hit a player for 50. But anyways, I think this should be in the place of the planar bridge for sure. Then Elvis is fine. I think Elvis is very very cute, and I like it here. Eldrazi Monument is great. The rest are really good. So let's talk about certain things that I think the deck could also benefit from to kind of improve how it works without radically changing the power level. Now, something that I just feel I always mention, and I think it's always worth mentioning, not smallpox, sorry. Um, you could use a little more draw. You do have some very powerful draw spells like Midnight Reaper that trigger off of your creatures dying, your non-token creatures dying. But what I like to have is I like to have just a few cards here and there that just straightforwardly allow us to draw cards. And Mono Black has a lot of really good options. Sign in Blood, fantastic option. Read the Bones, always a good one. Phyrexian Arena, nice every turn spell. And then the other one is Underworld Connections. One more enter. Oh, there we go. Underworld Connections. All of these cards will draw you cards regularly to keep your deck going. They're not particularly broken, powerful cards, but it's just useful to have these available to you, and you're in the right color for it, right? If we had different colors, we could mix it up, but we're in black, so we might as well use it. And then even then, you can always go with Greed, which is the more powerful version of these cards while being more mana intensive, with the idea that you can use your Power Stones to pay for a majority of your spells. So spending your black mana out to do this is completely fine. So those are the things that come to mind. After that, the next thought is I wouldn't mind to have some alternative win conditions. And the first one I'm going to say is Bad Moon, because it does fit within budget. Bad Moon says black creatures get +1/+1. Uh, Bad Moon is kind of bad, but is fantastic in a deck like this. If we look at how many of your creatures are black and how Bad Moon is objectively doubling a lot of their power, it's kind of a fun card. You have a lot of leeway for you to be able to go wide incredibly quickly, right? By playing your creatures out on curve, sacrificing them turn by turn, you're creating a large deposit of extra mana, especially a lot of mana that keeps bringing back your reassembling skeletons back from the dead, allowing you to go in for attack after attack after attack, which is fantastic. So having something like Bad Moon is very good at powering that up, doubling the strength of your creatures. Now, I believe I believe we can find one or two more of these cards. These aren't effects. Anthems aren't effects that I usually like. Creatures get. All right, let us see what reasonably we can pull out, which isn't a terrible card. We're going to come back to that. I'd like to put that in my brain somewhere. So, creatures that are enchanted. Death Pit Offering was the other one I was thinking of. Raider Spoils doesn't really work here. And I think that's it. I think Death Pit Offering is a really, really fun card for your deck. Where on ETB, you sacrifice your entire board. And then from that point on, your creatures are much, much stronger. This card alone triples the power of reassembling Skeleton. This is the kind of card that I would never put into another deck, but a deck like this is really, really fun in, right? Because you have a lot of really hokey creatures, and you can just turn them all into 3/3 beasts to go and attack with. And any creatures, like, yeah, you might lose Ashnod, that does happen, but if you don't have Ashnod on the board, like she's been destroyed or bounced or whatever, and you have a few skeletons, I think you're perfectly fine playing Death Pit Offering because yeah, it's rough to lose your skeletons, but it's less rough when they come back. So I like that quite a bit. Then the next thing I'm thinking of is that I always like I want to give your commander a little bit of evasion because she needs to attack without dying. Now, I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier, but this is a fun, fun card in this deck, right? The trade-off for Cultist of the Absolute is that you sacrifice a creature every single turn. Your deck does this. Now, this is a lot of interesting abilities with only one of them wasted, as she already has Death Touch. But making Ashnod a 4/4 flyer, which is, I would say, the main part of it. The ward pay 3 life is cute too. But is really makes her strong. It makes her fun to attack with. Like she's still not what I would consider a threat. She represents 6 attacks with just this on the field, where she needs to attack 6 times in order to get commander damage in. So I don't view that as a particular threat. But flavorfully, it really fits, doesn't it? Like Cultist of the Absolute just increases the number of sacrifices you have to do per turn from 1 to 2. And I'm fairly certain Ashnod is a May, right? May. So if you get if you get a little worried, you can stop sacrificing creatures. But then I would say, but why would you? Because that's fantastic. Double the number of sacrifices to double your fun. Ashnod, like the way, sorry, Cultist of the Absolute works in addition is that because it triggers on upkeep and the majority of your reassembling skeleton effects are an instant speed ability, not all of them, and some of them have clauses, but most of them don't, you can respond to this trigger. Like if Ashnod's the only creature on board, you can respond to this trigger by reanimating the skeleton and then sacrificing it when this trigger goes off. So you're not even in like that bad of a position if your opponents are trying to be clever and like keeping your skeletons off the board, right? I think it's very, very impressive. I think it would work together very well. Another thing recently, I think I put into a Duran deck. No. What kind of key is it? It gives Skulk. Maybe I made a mistake looking by key. Maybe it doesn't even. Oh, there it is. Skeleton Key. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Skeleton Key gives your commander, gives the creature equipped Skulk, and it also makes it so when they deal damage, you can loot. Now, obviously, this is fantastic with Power Stones because it's an artifact, so you can use Power Stones to pay for all of this, both the activation and, sorry, both the cast and the equip. But once again, Ashnod is a 1/1. So when she has Skulk, she's particularly hard to block. So this is a really good combination together. And also, I should also say because I gave this idea to them too. I'm trying to remember what it's called. Black enchantment, tempted by the ring, call of the ring. Oh, that's out of budget. Okay, unfortunate. But what we could also do instead is remove this line of text and just look up, and we'll sort by mana value. If there's any of these tempted by the ring abilities that catch your eye, they could be playable as well. Remember that the first part of tempted by the ring gives you skulk. And that's the one you really want for Ashnod. Now, at a low power thing, do you really want to introduce Tempted by the Ring? I would argue no. I don't really, me and a lot of the people I know don't really like an ability like this. It's very much so like initiative or enter the dungeon kind of thing, where you're bringing in a separate what do you call them? Not a meta game, a side game into the play that some players will not understand or care to understand. It's not like Monarch where it does what it says. These ones you require extra text or extra cards or token cards to fully give you ideas of what it does. And even then, it probably does more than you expect it to do. So I'll leave you to decide that. But being able to tempt by the ring once, just once with Ashnod out, is enough to give her Skulk, and with that, you can get your attacks in with less worry. Then I think the last thing I'd like to really suggest is probably something that sacrifices artifacts, as you have quite a few artifacts. Sacrifice, ooh, there's no S. Sacrifice artifact is also. So I'm talking about something as simple as annihilating glare, where for 1 black you can destroy target creature, but you have to pay 4 unless you sacrifice a creature or an artifact. In the same way, I believe there is, let's sort by mana value, costly plunder, and deadly dispute, though I think dispute's a little more expensive than costly plunder. Yes. Both of these do. Both of these will allow you to sacrifice a artifact to draw 2, with Deadly Dispute also making a treasure token which replaces the Power Stone, which is particularly strong. I think those are the only 2 I'd really play. I think that being said, Reckoner's Bargain can also draw you 2 for 2, but the gaining the mana value means nothing because it's a token with 0 mana value, so not as good. And you're already playing Braids, so you're already doing the thing. Now, are you playing Keskit? I don't remember. No. I might suggest Keskit. I think this will be my last suggestion. Keskit, I think, would fit particularly well in a deck like this because so Keskit sacrifices 3 artifacts and or creatures. You look at the top 3 cards of your library, and then you put 2 of them in your hand and 1 in your graveyard. That's a particularly strong ability, though it seems like there's a pretty high, floor to get in. Like the hoop you have to jump through is to have 3 permanents that you're willing to sacrifice. But I think it's worth thinking about because a lot of your creatures, especially your early creatures, return from the graveyard, and I think so they're fine to sacrifice. Then, in addition, the Power Stones, which, yeah, I don't think you want to get rid of them at that rate of like tap this and sacrifice 3. Like that's 3 turns of work that you removed. But if you've got opponents that have abilities, like if someone plays Stony Silence, or if someone plays a Wrath that only affects artifacts, for example, having Keskit out to at least get you some of your value back for the Power Stones you're losing can be particularly strong here. The fact that Keskit also throws that last card into the graveyard also functions here really well because that could be a reassembling skeleton that you're just going to throw into your graveyard for later. I think those are my main thoughts about the deck. I think it's really, really strong. I love Graz as a finisher in a deck like this. I like a lot of the little nice touches that it has, and a lot of different ways it makes the most out of what's available. And I like it. I don't know what else to say. I think the obvious kind of thought that one might have looking at this deck is, hey, what if you just lose to Graveyard Hate? And the answer is probably going to be yeah, and then you lose. This deck doesn't have a really good answer to Graveyard Hate, partially why I recommended Bad Moon, and what is it? Something in the Pit. I forgot it already. It's a card that I would never recommend. Well, let's see if I can find it back here. Nope, it's gone forever. Too bad. Um, I think I think the idea of going in and attacking them all your opponents to death is a very difficult one to get going in a deck like this. If someone plays Rest in Peace, I think that's kind of it. You're going to do your best to play, but you have a very few kind of options. Ashnod can use all that mana to start exiling creatures from your graveyard before they're gone forever to get some 3/3s out of the deal. But like that might not change the situation where you're just going to be really, really far behind. And so having different cards, like having Bolas' Citadel, having the Bad Moon card, all of these are kind of options that can kind of get you back in the game. But I think there's no shame at a deck at this power level to just fold to some like Graveyard Hate. I think it's just an acceptable part of the whole deal. All in all, I really, really like this deck. I would love to see another would say another draft of this. I think it's really, really strong. I think I didn't go into the lands too much. I think this is fine. I think if you wanted, you could play a lot of the black cycle cards because they're practically free. You're playing 29 swamps, and your black pips are less intensive than one would think. Ayara stands out, but the rest I think are very like doable. So I think you could play some cycling lands. I could think you could play a few more utility lands in mono black. I don't know if Castle Lochthwain is a little out of budget. I think it's not, but that could be a card that goes in here pretty freely. And yeah, I'm really interested to see another draft of this deck. This has caught my eye quite a bit because I love Aristocrats. Aristocrats is one of those decks that I really, really enjoy how it works. It feels like a really clean answer to Black's problems in a multiplayer format. And I like that this deck is a variant on this Aristocrat style, where it's less so about the Blood Artists and it's more about the reassembling skeletons, which I think is really neat. And I think a lot of, you know, lower power decks should aspire to have this kind of interesting hook to them. If you do decide to send me another draft, or you'd like to send me a version of any deck, there is a form in the YouTube video description below that I'd love for you to fill out. And as always, if you could comment, you know, like the video, subscribe, that jazz, it helps us quite a bit. Do the YouTube thing, and it helps get our channel moving. All right. Good luck with the deck, and I'm very impressed.